You have a sheet, Judy?
The name down and
Do you ladies want a sheet, Esther 4?
let's see.
You got Esther 3, I bet, huh?
I wasn't here last week.
That's Esther 4 if you want it. I
don't
don't know if you have that or not.
I don't
but-
have 3 either, so.
Oh, Pam.
That's all right.
I think Pam is coming.
Oh, sheet? Well, then we'll wait. We'll wait. It's impossible, I can't see.
I think that was, I just saw somebody walking, just,
Someone came in the door, that's for sure. That looks like Pam's vehicle.
maybe she's not coming here. No.
Judy and Pam now drive vehicles that are very similar, just different models. Good morning. Ford and Chevy. So. Hi, good morning.
We can share.
What we'll do is we'll begin with a prayer and then we'll jump into this Esther chapter 4. Let's pray. Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you for placing us in this world and giving us opportunity to, change people's lives the way in which you changed ours by calling us to be yours. Move us to see the great and awesome place that you've put us in, and move us to look for opportunities to share the loving message of your Son, our Savior, Jesus. Amen. All right, so Esther chapter 4, we would maybe almost say, you might actually say this is the chapter. This is the place. We kind of find ourselves right on the edge of the excitement, so to speak, when we end chapter 4. We're going to see there's information related to Esther from Mordecai about the terrible thing that's taking place, and we're going to see Esther finally decide to take action. We don't get to that quite yet, but we see her make that decision. So the first question is really a warm-up. It says sometimes the situations that we find ourselves in have a bigger purpose than we might realize. Can you think of a time where something small turned out to be bigger than you expected it? Or when something big wasn't as big as it was made out to be? I think it happens, I think, sometimes in life where we have a false understanding of how big or small a situation is. I know as a kid, we definitely have a false understanding of how big or small a situation is. I can remember one time I broke my mother's potholder ring. It wasn't the potholder, just the ring. It was a wooden ring, and I thought that was the end of my life. I thought my mom's going to find out, and I will be done for. So I glued it back together. It was a very good glue job. I don't even think she noticed, actually. She didn't. I don't think she noticed that it had a ring. I don't think she noticed that it didn't have a ring. It wasn't that big of a deal. Although in my, 8-year-old head, it was a huge deal. But it really wasn't. You got anything like that you think about from maybe just that you know about, or maybe has happened to you, something like that? It does happen that we do this sometimes. What do you think?
I just think of one of the biggest changes I think in all of our lives has been the COVID thing.
COVID. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole world has changed since then.
Sure.
What people think of the medical industry and what they think of, everything, just
Sure.
Your cause of infections and just,
Morning, Janine.
oh,
Sorry I'm late.
You're okay. You were just fine. I normally don't start till now anyway, so kind of right on time.
That's what I thought. With any luck, I could make it.
Well, we're just on that first question, thinking about our perspective of things. Some things seem big, even though they're small, and some things seem small, and they might be kind of big. Anybody else got something? No right or wrong here. When I wrote that question, I also thought of, like when people come to church, sometimes the small things actually make a big difference. Someone to say hello, to greet you, that type of stuff can make a world of difference to someone who's in in their mind, a very, and seemingly true, a difficult place. You know, going into a building where you don't know anybody, someone to say hello, someone to say, hey, how's it going? You want to sit here? That's great. Can make all the difference in the world. Please, June.
I guess as I'm thinking, when you mentioned that, I remember when Kristen was having her first brain surgery, and there was just, you know, my parents were dead. Tom's parents didn't care about anything, so we were pretty much alone. Tom and I were close, but Paul and Lila saw us sitting in the waiting room, and they came down and sat with us until she came out of surgery, which was way longer than even open heart surgeries. Those people were going out of the waiting room. We were still sitting there.
Sure.
And it would just, to that, Lila still, when I mentioned that to her, how grateful we are to that, and I've mentioned it before, I know, but it was, and she said, well, we just saw you there, and we were up there for some reason, you know, the St. A's, and well, we just thought we'd sit with you, and it was no,
Yeah.
it was like very little to them, and it was the world to us.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. That's exactly the situation we're thinking about, right? This is a little different because I think we can see how monumental this really is. Like, there are certain things that we can just note and say, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. And I think as we think about Esther coming to this point, sometimes you recognize the big deal, sometimes you don't.
I don't think Esther knew what she was getting into.
We'll talk about that. I just think there are certain times in people's lives when, you know, you maybe do one thing, and to the person doing it, not a big deal. But to the people that are impacted by it, it's not a game changer, but it means something. It really
You get
means
so
something.
involved in your own life that it just seems like you can hardly step out of the box. And when someone comes and says something to you, you're like, oh,
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
that's the way I am anyway.
Sure. Yeah. All right, so we're gonna jump in and we're gonna start reading this chapter, and then we're gonna work through it. So let's see. I'm gonna go on this side over here. My drink's over here. So when Mordecai became aware of everything that had happened, he ripped his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, went out into the middle of the city, and let out a loud, bitter cry. He went right up to the king's gate, even though no one clothed with sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every single province that was reached by the proclamation of the king, and where the decree was posted, there was great mourning, fasting, and weeping, and lamenting among the Jews. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's female attendants and her eunuchs came and told her what had happened, the queen agonized over it. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he could take off his sackcloth, but he did not accept them. Esther summoned Hadhak, who had been assigned from among the king's eunuchs to attend her. She ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. All right, so in this section, the first question we've got there on their sheet is, we get to see how Mordecai responds to the edict. And the edict, remember, is that on a specific day, all the Jews would be exterminated or annihilated, whatever words you want to use there. And then you could take their stuff. You could plunder all their goods. Issued by the king because of Haman. And so when Mordecai heard this, we get to see what Mordecai does. What does he do? What does Mordecai do?
Mourns.
He mourns.
Sackcloth.
He puts on sackcloth. And the question that I have, is this a normal response to news like this? When you get bad news, what do? Oh, you probably mourn. But do you put on sackcloth? No, you don't do that anymore. Is this an uncommon thing? If we read the Bible, what do we see?
It's done more than once.
Yeah, it's done more than once, right? I have that Daniel passage, which the reason why I chose this passage is because this is we're going to say a similar time period. Not the exact same time, but in a similar time period, right? Daniel's in exile. Esther right now is in exile. Daniel served as a royal in the royal court of the kings in which he was at, underneath the same government system, different king, but same government system. And what does Daniel do? Daniel says, with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes, I turn my face to the Lord to seek him in prayer and to plead for grace. And then the next verse, I prayed to the Lord my God, and I made confession. So Daniel, another Israelite, similar time period, similar position, we would say, he saw appropriate to do what? To put on sackcloth and ashes. What I thought would be interesting then is can you think of anybody else who puts on sackcloth and ashes from the Bible? And I've obviously got some references there, which I think would be good to look at. Maybe each group of people take one. So maybe you ladies do Genesis, Ernst do 2 Samuel, and then in the back there, Ravenbergs, you take Jonah 3. But you find yourself looking at somebody who's in a difficult spot, and what do they do? If you've got that Genesis 37, why don't you go ahead and read it, and I'll try to pull it up on the board. There we go. Someone want to read that?
Jacob tore his clothing, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son for many days.
Right, and in this regard, this is when Joseph, the news of Joseph, the brothers bring Jacob his robe, and they say, "Is this your son's?" And obviously Jacob recognizes it, and he's distraught. So at the death of, in Jacob's mind, the death of his son, he puts on sackcloth. Right. The next one is 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel 1. If you have it, you can go ahead and read it, and I'll get it.
David and all the men with him grabbed their clothing and tore it.
All right, let's see here.
And that was with Saul.
Right, if you ever really want to know the context real fast, sometimes you could just kind of scroll up. But look at this, after the death of Saul, right? So in this regard, we've got David in response to the death of his king. What does he do? He puts on sackcloth. Now, something interesting to note, these two people are, we would say, a part of the family of God, right? Jacob is the father of, he is Israel, right? David is a part of Israel, maybe we would say the greatest king Israel's ever had besides Jesus. Both very much in the people of God. I kind of found it quite interesting when I was thinking about this, that one of the people that came to my mind wasn't a part of the family of God at all. But when you go to Jonah, what do you see? I gotta find it first.
That's pretty remarkable that David mourned Saul
Yeah, I always thought that too. Because what did he try to do to him all his life?
all of his life.
Well, I think in this regard, if you really, we just came out of that section of government on Sunday morning, I'm really surprised that they didn't reference David a whole lot more, especially from the time when Saul was attacking him. Because David had the opportunity twice to kill Saul, and what was his response? I will not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. You gotta be kidding me. Everybody was like, David, do it. And he said, I will not. I will not. I think maybe we would say that's maybe even a clearer picture than Romans 3 in the aspect of saying, how should we respond to a government that is attacking us? David's response was, I will not attack him back. I will not take his life. I won't do it. In fact, David goes out of his way to be like, look, I had the opportunity, but I'm not a threat. I'm not a threat here. I'm not a threat here, right? It's only after he's being pursued so much that David then finally leaves, right? He leaves his country and goes somewhere else, right? But, right, very amazing picture to see David here refraining from, or not refraining from, but actually just looking at Saul and recognizing here is someone whom the Lord had appointed to watch over the people of Israel. And his death is one that is sad, deserves mourning, right? The one that I kind of thought of when I was thinking of this, which I think is an interesting account all in of itself, is Jonah. We know the story of Jonah, right? I have us reading 5 through 9, and you could read all the way to 10, but it's just kind of an interesting thing, right? The men of Nineveh believed God. They proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least. When word reached the king of Nineveh, he got up from his throne, took off his royal robe, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And then he issued a proclamation in Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his leading officials, do not let people or animals, herds, or flocks taste anything. Do not let them eat food or drink water. Instead, let people and animals be covered with sackcloth. Let everyone call fervently to God. Let them turn from their evil way and from the violence that is in their hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent. He may turn from his burning anger so that we will not perish. Right? And then God obviously sees their action and relents. But we would say in this regard, is this a group of Israelites? No. However, it does kind of lay the groundwork to say, what are these people? These people are obviously doing what? They're turning to the Lord and praying to him. Kind of just an interesting thought, at least when I was going through this. I thought that was interesting, right? Is this a practice only done by God's people? The answer is no, it's not. Or at least not the nation of Israel. It's people who suffer a loss. This is what they do. They mourn. And in that sense, we would say, do we mourn? Of course we do. Our mourning might look different than the Old Testament people. It might look different than the New Testament people, right? If you read John 11, which is more fresh in some of our minds than not, because we had a sermon on it not too long ago, they had professional wailers, right? They would pay people to come and to wail for them, to mourn for them. But just kind of an interesting thing that different people at different times, they hear news and they're impacted by that news in a different way. So, I don't know. Can we think of anybody else who put on sackcloth and ashes? Maybe you can. Job, yeah, absolutely. 100%. Job, we see Job do that, right? You are correct.
Well, all the people, the Israelites, when they heard that they were all going to be killed, a lot of them did.
Yeah, even in Esther too, it says all over those different provinces, not just Mordecai, but these other people of Israel. And you might be talking about another instance, but yeah, okay. But it's not an uncommon thing to see sackcloth and ashes brought out.
And what is, I don't quite understand the fasting part and all of it too.
Good. I didn't really make any fuss about it because we're going to see that. Maybe I'm just going to leave it and we'll come back to it. Is that okay? Because I think we need more context before I want to jump down that not really a rabbit hole, but down that conversation. Okay. Hang on to that though, because I think we're going to come back to these passages. Because I think in every instance, what did we see? Was in that Genesis 37? Was there fasting? And was there in 2 Samuel? Was there fasting?
Yeah.
I think there was.
Yeah.
I don't know about in Genesis, but I think there was.
Samuel was, because the rest of the people thought, man, you're really doing
Right.
a lot of mourning while.
Yeah,
you're
and I didn't check those passages. I very clearly saw it with, you very clearly see it with Jonah, which we're going to talk about as we move forward, because I think there's something to be said about that as we move forward in the Book of Esther. But we'll have that conversation in a little bit of time. All right. Notice Esther's response to the news about Mordecai. What can we say about the way she responds? Did you guys catch that? The EHV is different than the NIV in the way in which they describe Mordecai. I think you get a little different picture, I think, of Esther from the way that the EHV handles this passage.
They didn't seem to understand what he was
Right.
worried.
And actually, as you look at it, if you were to look at it, and I'm not saying take the worst possible thing, but what does she do? Like the fact that Mordecai is doing these things almost seems to do what? It seems like it's an embarrassment to her.
Yeah, because she tried to get him to wear clothes again.
Yeah, right? I think as we start to read it unfold, it's very clear that Esther is not in the understanding of what's going on. Like we get that information before we see Esther get that information. Because the very next thing that we're going to see is Haddock reporting back to Esther from Mordecai this information that the Jews are going to be annihilated. But as of right now, what we see is Esther hears about Mordecai, and her first response is, he's hurting. I'm assuming her response is he's hurting. Let's send him some clothes that he might not be in such a position. But it is kind of you just think about, if they had a close relationship, I mean, like, why not send Haddock first before, and not send him with clothes, but ask, hey, what's going on? As opposed to just saying, here, take these clothes, put them on. And her being distraught over. I don't know.
Did he need to change clothes so he could come in to see her?
Well, there's no like, she doesn't get to see him. They run everything through this Haddock. And you'll see that as we read through it, that there really is no, and maybe that's Esther's desire. That Mordecai would put on these clothes and then he could come in and he could see her. But Mordecai says, I will not. I'm not going to take off my sackcloth. So what we do see is we see this, Esther sends Haddock to talk to Mordecai and kind of be like this errand guy between the two. Which, in my mind, when you think about what we looked at chapter 1, Mordecai had asked Esther not to reveal her nationality. Maybe that's why Mordecai doesn't want to come and see Esther. I don't know.
But
Again,
that word agonized makes me think she is thinking all this through, and she's like, I'm not supposed to reveal my nationality. I mean,
right. And this is the thing that's kind of maybe very frustrating about Esther, is that we get no motivation. This is really just, and we've talked about this before, this is really just, here's how things happen. And so when you're looking at it, there's different ways you can look at it because all you have is the events. Right? You don't know any of the motivation. I think you can see that very clearly with Queen Vashti, right? At the very beginning, chapter 1. Queen Vashti refuses King Xerxes' request. We don't have a lot of information there. We just have, this is what happened, she refused. That's it. What are the motivations? We don't know. But I think as we study it, it's not a terrible thing for us to just look very closely and say, what kind of things could be going on here? You can't say with certainty on a lot of them, but I think when you start to look at what things are going on, it kind of maybe can help you piece together a little bit, saying, I think maybe this is the direction I'm going to go. Knowing that I can't say it firmly, but it seems to kind of fit together nicely.
Well, Esther didn't have any, she wasn't able to foretell the future. She didn't know what was going to happen. She didn't have any.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going. Let's
so
keep going.
Did
We're
you,
good.
Pastor, last time when you had that edict go out, or that, does she have knowledge of that? Or is she don't even care about it? Doesn't know about it.
It seems like, especially from what we read next, that she has no idea. It seems like she doesn't have a clue. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to see that too as we hear her concern about the situation that she finds herself in. So we're going to read this, and then we're going to jump into that question 5. So 6 through 17 reads this way. It says, Hadok went out to Mordecai in the public square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened and the exact amount of silver that Haman had said he would put into the treasury of the king to destroy the Jews. Mordecai also gave Hadok a copy of the written decree, which had been issued in Susa to destroy the Jews, so that he could show it to Esther. Hadok was to place the responsibility upon her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. So Hadok went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Esther spoke to Hadok and gave him directions to pass on to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that it is law that any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned will be put to death, unless the king holds out the golden scepter to him. Then he will live. But I have not been called to go to the king for 30 days. They told Mordecai what Esther had said. Mordecai responded, "Take this message to Esther. Do not imagine that of all the Jews you alone will escape, because you are part of the king's household. If at this time you keep totally silent, relief and deliverance for the Jews will spring up from somewhere, but you and the house of your father will perish. Who knows whether you have become queen for a time like this?" Esther responded to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are found in Susa, fast on my behalf. Do not eat and drink for 3 days and nights. I and my young women will fast in the same way, and after that I will go to the king, contrary to the law. And then, if I perish, I perish." Mordecai went away and did everything Esther had ordered him to do. So what you have as we look at this last section of chapter 4 is there's really this back and forth, right? And especially with the very first relay of information that Hadok takes, what do you see? Mordecai that's wrong. Bad English. Mordecai not only gives Esther the written edict, but he sends with Hadok more information. What information was Hadok to relay to Esther, and why? If you're just looking at the very first instance, what information is Esther now then privy to? Which would answer your question, Kareem.
The amount of money with.
Yeah, not just the edict itself, because I'm guessing in the edict it has nothing to do. It might, but my guess is that the edict is the Jews will be exterminated on this day at such a time. All of their possessions are to go to, I'm guessing, the royal court. I'm guessing that's what, I don't know what it says because we don't have it, but what you see is then that Mordecai gives Esther all this background information. This is coming from Haman, and not only is it coming from Haman, he's willing to pay a lot of money to make this happen. If you remember last time we had talked about that amount, I think it's 10,000 silver talents, which would have been a very high amount. Some resources, I think the EHV Study Bible has over half of the income of the kingdom for a year is what that would have amounted to. No doubt it was a substantial amount of money. So Hadok relays all this information to Esther. The question is why might Mordecai say all of this? Why might he give her more than just the edict itself?
He's getting pretty desperate.
He's getting pretty desperate. Think long term.
To warn her?
Warn her, absolutely, to warn her. I think also preparing her to lay on her exactly what he asks Hadok to tell her. Right? So I think all this information is to come, and then at the very end of it, what does he say? Mordecai also gave a written decree. Okay, Haddock was to, and here it is. Haddock was to place the responsibility upon her to go to the king to beg for mercy and to plead with him for her people. Now, if it's just an edict, I think in this sense, Mordecai's thought, and this is just me speculating, Mordecai's thought is this probably isn't that big of a deal. This isn't going to be something that we have to take too seriously. But the fact that it's Haman, which I'm guessing, we know Haman is Xerxes' what? Drinking buddy? We know that from the very end of chapter 3. This is a guy close to the king. And I'm sure that what's relayed is that Haman is coming after me, but not only me, but all the Jews. Right? So you've got Haman's hatred. And then, on top of that, you also have Xerxes' greed. Right? Because Haman has said, I'm going to pay a lot of money to make sure this happens. So I think what at least in my mind, when I think this through, Mordecai is preparing Esther to drop that bomb of, it's all up to you. It's all up to you, Esther. This is something that will not change. You are the one that has to take care of this. Because this is coming from the top. And the only way this is solved is, guess what? From the top. So I think in giving her this information, Mordecai is preparing Esther for that news of, yeah, this one's on you. There's not much I can do about it. Haman actually hates me. I'm an official, but I can do nothing to reverse this. This one's got to be on your plate, Esther. So after receives this message from Haddock, she has a reason for pause, right? And as the responsibility is placed upon her, what does she do? What does Esther do?
She kind of makes an excuse, so
Yeah.
can't do this. So.
Yeah. She sends Haddock back with a message for Mordecai. And the response is, and what's interesting to me is, I don't know if you caught it. I just now caught it. Actually, as I was reading through it, none of the commentaries really comment about this. But as they say all this, this is interesting to me. They told Mordecai what Esther had said. So Haddock is not acting by himself now. You must have some of the ladies from Esther's
Circle?
yeah, must be also going with, which is I think where you get the notion at the very bottom where Esther says, me and the ladies will also. So I'm thinking that these ladies must really care about Esther. That's my thought. I don't know who the they is, but that's, in my mind, that would make the most sense if that's who it is. So they go and they go tell Mordecai, listen, what you're asking really doesn't seem feasible. Right? The response that Esther gives, and I wonder, you can't read too much into it. This is obviously Esther speaking, but you wonder who's in her ear. You know what I mean? You wonder who's in her ear, and what they're saying or what their motivation is. You don't know any of that. You don't know any of that. But Esther sends this message to Mordecai and says, I don't think I can do this. And in the list, I said there's three things, at least three things that when I looked at this, I thought, this could easily be something that might cause Esther to have pause. Really, two of them we know for certain. One of them is kind of me just looking at the text saying, I think this would also cause for pause. What things, when you look at the text, do we see? You're talking about it at your table. Come up with three things from the text that would give Esther pause, or does give Esther pause.
She can't approach the king.
It's interesting, NIV doesn't have the word they.
Yeah, and that's what I said. I just now caught that. So I'm wondering if the EHV has either they're pulling the they off the end of a verb that actually could be singular. I'm not for sure, and I don't know why they do that. So that's interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go look at it later, but not right now. What three things? What's three things that might have caused Esther pause? Use the restroom.
dangerous to them. Is that the king?
So-
Is that, am I on the right track?
So this is when they're taken away to different countries, so does this wipe out the Jews, or are there still remnants of Jews all over?
Rejected and
That's the part I think about, because there's so often, they just want to wipe out all the Jews, even with what happened in October,
Court for 30
a
days.
year or two ago, over a year now. But there must still be some.
Oh, I think that, I would think that.
What do you think?
There was 4 Jews.
Yeah.
she fears the king's response.
Yeah.
So one thing that causes her pause is this law that she knows, right? Listen, it's true that if you go up to the king and you have not been summoned and you go into his inner courts, you're gonna die, unless the king allows it.
Then they have to put the scepter out.
Yeah. So there's that law. I think that Esther's concerned about. This is I've heard of people who go to the king and they were not summoned, and this is the result that they faced. The other thing that might cause her pause.
She didn't know if the king would revoke the edict.
I didn't catch it.
She didn't know for sure if the king would revoke the edict.
Yeah, right. She doesn't know if this is going to be successful or not, or if she's even going to be able to have an audience with the king. What else might come into that notion that the king might not agree to this?
Well, it said she hadn't been summoned for 30 days, so maybe she's
Good.
really not as
Good.
high up as she thinks she is.
Good. Right? We see here that, I mean, how this is the queen, and it's been a month. I don't know how long it would take. I don't know if this is a normal thing, but in this regard, I would imagine 30 days is 30 days. It's not like you're far away. So in this sense, it's like maybe he's annoyed with Esther. I mean, we can't put that out of the scope, right? Because what happened to his last wife?
Yeah, I'm doing something.
She was shuffled off to the side because she refused, because she caused him to be upset at her, right? And we might say even Queen Vashti, what she was doing was not like, maybe the request that was made by him was just crazy, and she's saying, I'm not doing that, right? We don't know. We don't have any information, but I think it's safe to say when we look at that there's concern in Esther's mind to say, I don't know how good of a relationship I have with the king right now. Like, maybe he's really mad at me, and that's why I've never been there. And this me walking into the court thing is just the thing that he needs to say, I'm going to get rid of you. Anything else in there? This last one I thought was maybe a little bit more difficult, but I thought this is probably something else, at least as I was thinking about it, that probably would cause Esther pause, or maybe would cause me pause if I was in this situation, which, I mean, it's hard to say, but go for it.
By her approaching, would she be revealing that she's a Jew?
So there's that.
And what does he really think about that group?
Right. So there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that go along with this. What do you want me to do? Well, I want you to reverse this. Why? 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 What does this matter to you? You live in the palace. What does this matter to you? You know what I mean? Like, so I think in this regard, there is this kind of like, well, I've never told anybody that I was a Jew. Although I think in this sense, the people that are close to her, I think, I can't imagine that they wouldn't know. You know, like Haddock, who's going back and forth.
Right.
I would think like he's probably got 2 and 2 together. I think in this sense, this other guy we saw before when Esther first became king is no longer around, and that's because it's been 5 years. So we don't know where he is. Maybe he's moved on to something better or whatever. But obviously Esther trusts this Haddock to send him to Mordecai. So I'm guessing that maybe Haddock knows. Well, he has to know because of what Mordecai says, right? Mordecai actually says, you don't think that you will escape. So obviously, Haddock knows. I'm guessing the ladies in her court that attend her probably also know. But it's very possible Xerxes doesn't know. Which is kind of an amazing thing to think about. You know, like, kind of a relationship is that between a king and a queen. Another thing that I think you could maybe put in there is you're not only dealing with Xerxes' love for Esther, which could probably ebb and flow. That's also being maybe we'll say put on the scale against 10,000 silver talents. You know, like it's almost like does King Xerxes love Esther? Sure, yeah, sure. Does he love her for 10,000 silver talents? Yeah, I don't know. That one I don't know. He hasn't seen her in 30 days. Who knows? You know. So I think all of these things are kind of working into this difficult situation that Esther finds herself in. I think there's definitely a reason for Esther to cause pause. I think too, and this next question kind of hits at that. I kind of think who wouldn't, in all honesty. Esther's first response to this very monumental moment is, I can't do this. How might we sympathize with Esther? So that's question one. And is there anyone from the Bible or your personal history that has had or has responded in the same way to something big coming up in their life, and the response is, I can't do this? Moses, absolutely. Who'd you say? Jonah, absolutely. Right? Anybody else?
Joseph with Mary, wondering what's going on.
Yeah, there's probably a moment where Joseph was like, I can't do this. And then he had an angel come and visit him, right? To convince him, it's okay to take Mary home as your wife. What's happening is from the Lord. So excellent.
Abraham, or Sarah and Abraham, she didn't believe that angel that came to tell them that they were going to have a son.
Sarah obviously doesn't believe. And actually I think the thought is I can't remember exactly what she says, but as she's in the tent, behind Abraham and the three visitors, she laughs. Obviously that's where Isaac comes from, Isaac, laughter. Will I really, right? Will I really be a mother at my age? This is nonsense. I can't do that. I think that's fair. I think you could say that. Hebrews, the author of Hebrews says that their bodies were as good as dead. In the aspect of like their fertility, like it's true. This is totally only God's working in Abraham and Sarah, right? Anybody else that we can think of?
Did Elijah, am I got the right prophet, when he was under a fig tree, or am I got the wrong guy?
Elijah, we do see Elijah reluctant when he goes and he hides, right? He has this great standoff with the prophets of Baal, and then he runs because he's afraid because of Jezebel, who's going to come and kill him. And he goes to the Lord and he says, I can't do this. I'm all by myself. There's nobody else. And it's there the Lord says, there's 6,000 people who have not bowed a knee down to Baal. Like, you're not alone. Don't think that you are. I think that would be very much fitting into this this kind of a conversation. I think as you look at the Bible, I think as you have already made very clear, is that there's multiple times when people are put in situations to where they find themselves really kind of abandoning their hope in themselves and saying, I can't do this. And then what comes next? What comes after their I can't do this?
They do it.
They do it, and they do it because why?
Well, God fixes it.
Yeah, the Lord comes in and has to do something. Moses says, I can't do this. Listen, I don't speak very well. And God says, you listen. I will put the words in your mouth. And to respond to that is, I don't know if I can do it. I'm going to send your brother. He's going to help you. Right? Jonah, I'm not doing this. Those people are scoundrels. I will not do this. go into the bottom of the sea, get swallowed by a fish. Go do it. And that one is interesting because even after he does it, he's still like, oh, Lord, why did you have me do this for these people? Right? And the very last part of Jonah is, these are people, Jonah. These are people. Like, can't you see that I care about people? Like, I care about people. So should you. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And I think in this sense, I think that we can sympathize with Esther. There's things that maybe we have to do that we at first glance say, I really don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And in response to all of that, what should be our thing is if this is what is good, let's do it and know that the Lord will help me. Know that the Lord will help me. Right? I'm not oblivious to the fact that you leave these walls, you go out and you have lives, and those lives are filled with people, and sometimes people that we love have to have what is called tough love, and that's difficult. And sometimes the initial response from us is, I don't want to do this. I don't want to have this conversation. But it's needed. It's a needed thing. And we'll find ourselves maybe talking in that sense at the very end with the conclusion question. But let's jump to a couple other questions real fast. So with everything that's going on in these verses, it's just kind of baffling that when you think about the Book of Esther, what's one thing that you kind of just know? There's no mention of God here at all. It's strange.
Historical facts is all I mean.
Right. It's just so strange. And what's interesting then as a reader, you're reading it and you're just you just implant God into this whole thing. Like you read through it and you're looking at the situation, you're like, God's in there. He's totally in there. And then you can do a copy F or whatever, open Apple F and look for the name of God. It's not in there. You're not going to find it. But you look at the situation and it almost, it's just kind of amazing how this takes place. That as you look at this conversation between the Jews, Mordecai, and Esther, you almost just your brain just is like, oh, God is working here. God is working here. Right? Especially here, where you get to almost we would say, not kind of like the climax so far of the book. We're like, what's going to happen? What is the Lord going to do here? Right? But God's name is never mentioned, which I think is just fascinating. You have someone read through this, and they read the Bible, and you read through Esther, and you get to the end of chapter 4. Was God in there? And they're going to say, yeah, he's in there. Well, his name's never mentioned. And they're like, what? I don't believe it. And then you go back through, it's not there. It's not there. So I think that's just kind of a strange thing, especially in this situation. And then what can we say? What can we say about this? I don't know. I just find it kind of amazing that this is, as you're reading this, it's very easy to find yourself saying, no, yeah, God's here, even though his name is not mentioned. Which, if you were to take and make that an application question, what is that? What could we learn from that? I would say, your fruits of faith don't always come from your mouth. Right? Proclaiming God's praise is most certainly a fruit of faith, but sometimes the fruits that are visible to people aren't necessarily the things that are proclaimed from your mouth. They might actually be the things that you do. And even though God's name is not written on the things that you do, sometimes it can kind of speak loudly to, what's the motivation for why you're doing what you're doing. Does that make sense? Yeah?
I always think it's sort of, she says, then if I perish, I perish. I think of that so often. I mean, she just, okay, I'm doing this, and here I am. I don't know if I'm going to live or not.
Yeah, this is that question, right? What can we say about Esther's final decision in response to the situation? Like, is she resigning herself to say, I don't know, whatever?
She had to have some belief in God.
I don't know. We don't, the struggle, we don't have motivation. There's nothing there. This is just her words. And I also think when you look at what Mordecai says to Esther, he says to her, let's see if it's up here. It's good, right here. It's down a little bit. This is amazing to me.
14.
Where he says, if at this time you keep totally silent, relief and deliverance for the Jews will spring up.
I know. I've thought of that too. Okay.
Mordecai is
You're not gonna do it,
he
somebody
is
else is
very
gonna do it.
confident in the aspect of like, if you don't do this, Esther, it will happen. God will deliver us. Right? So you look at that and you go, it's kind of hard to describe that other than people who are trusting in the Lord working. And Esther's, if I perish, I perish. I also think in this sense, you could, not that you would look at it this way, but you might say, well, if it's going to be revealed to the king that she's a Jew, and she's going to end up being killed anyway, why not? Why not at least make a play? Why not try something? And you could look at it from a selfish standpoint. Esther, why not try to save yourself? Not only all these people, right? Why not try to save yourself? So, not that you would look at it that way, but I did read some stuff that they were like, well, Esther, what other thing could she do? This is the situation she's in. She's either going to go and ask King Xerxes to return this, or to take back this edict, or she's going to die no matter what. Which I don't really know if that would have been the case, in all honesty. I don't know if Esther would have died through this. Even from what we've read in this chapter, it seems like she's kind of removed from the world outside of the kingdom, right? She doesn't even know the edict's passed. She has to get this from third hand, like Mordecai tells Hannah. So I just kind of wonder how much she saw of the things that were going on among the everyday people. I kind of think of Marie Antoinette, right? The people are starving. Well, let them eat cake. That kind of a thought running through, like so removed that they're just oblivious to the things that are going on outside. I don't know if that's Esther, but I feel like there is some insulation there, where she doesn't have the full picture of what's taking place. Which also then kind of says, how close are you related to? Like, how close is your relationship with King Xerxes, right? How close are you and King Xerxes really if you don't really know any of the things that are going on? But maybe, you don't sit down at dinner and say, what kind of edicts did you pass today, honey? Oh, I put an edict to annihilate a whole group of people. It's just another day. What? So I don't know. But there's a lot of like really interesting things that you kind of just watch as they're unfolding. I don't know if we can say anything more about that, but if you want to, you certainly can. But the conclusion, the last question that I have is, Mordecai actually says, who knows? Maybe this is the reason that you're queen. Maybe this is the reason that you became queen. Is a purpose. You have a purpose. Which, one, you could say, I don't even know, like we don't even know the reason why she wanted to be king, or maybe she didn't want to be king, and so queen, so now she's, we don't know any of that. Maybe she did want to be queen. I don't know. We don't get any of that. But she's queen. Here's the situation. She's queen. She's in a position to do something, right? And so then the question is, hey, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And that, I think, the application-wise is like, we are in a position, right? We have seen the grace and the mercy of our God. That's what those passages, 1 Peter 2:9, Revelation 6:10. And so in what sense can we ask Mordecai's question of ourselves? This is, who knows, the situation that we're all in. What can I do in the situation that I'm in? That can actually not only change, my life, but maybe the lives of the people that I'm interacting with, right? Because that's what Esther's doing. She's looking to change the lives of a whole group of people. And it will definitely impact her life. There's no question about it, right? I think in a sense, it's maybe not a bad question for us to ponder. We talked about this at Fellowship a little bit. But to think about, where am I serving and how am I serving? And, like the situation that I find myself in, it's not a bad thing to evaluate that every once in a while, right? It's not a bad thing to evaluate, where are my gifts? How am I using them in service to the Lord, in service to my neighbor? Those are really good questions to ponder. Pastors have the professional obligation to do that every 6 months if they've been out of the seminary for 4 years. You deliberate your call, right? Oh, there's a call. Okay, well, all right. Well, Should I serve here or should I serve there? How am I using my gifts, right? That's a real thing. As a layperson, I think it's not a bad thing to do that either. How am I serving? Where are my gifts? What am I doing with them? And I think in this sense, like, this is kind of what Esther's come face to face with. I'm in this situation. I'm the only one in this situation. What am I going to do? And Esther has decided, we don't know how it's going to play out, but Esther has decided to do what? I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to the king. If I perish, I perish. That's the way it is. Kind of a hard thing to think about, being in that situation.
You're gonna perish on an empty stomach.
Perish on him. Oh yeah, thank you for bringing that back around. So here's one of the things. You know, the comment that there is no God mentioned in here. A lot of people will say, you know, with the sackcloth and ashes comes fasting. Fasting is oftentimes, and you saw it in the passage from Job. Fasting is oftentimes associated with prayer.
And repentance.
Yeah. So in this sense, a lot of people will say this here is where you're going to probably get the strongest emphasis on, like, a calling on God's name, or the strongest emphasis you get in the book of, like, some kind of religious activity from Esther and Mordecai is the act of fasting, because oftentimes the act of fasting does include prayer. Right? Where's it at? Down here, bottom.
Okay, fast on my behalf. Yeah.
Right.
And do not eat or drink for 3 days.
What's interesting, though, is that in this section there is no mention of prayer. Right? Esther says, "Go gather all the Jews who are found in Susa, fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or 3 nights, and I and my young women also will fast in the same way. After that, I will go to the king, contrary to law, and if I perish, I perish." The notion that this fasting would then also be would also include prayer, I think, and I think in this sense, this is where some people will say this is your biggest, strongest push here, that Esther and Mordecai are religious Jews. They're not just Jews by name, but they're also believers in God, because they have these religious practices such as fasting and praying. Although what's interesting is prayer's not mentioned there. It's not like, hey, you guys fast and pray for me, which I think maybe would make way more sense, you know, if you're a believer. Hey, why don't you petition the Almighty God on my behalf? That's probably going to be a whole lot better than saying, I'm not going to eat for 3 days. So I think this is why people are like, should this be in the Bible? Like, like the very first question that we had, is should this book be in the Bible? You get like two sides of this coin where you're like, this is strange. This is strange. It very easily could have included prayer in the name of the Lord here, and yet nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. I think, though, in my mind, this also then underscores really just very clearly for all of us the theme of Esther, which is who's always working, even behind the scenes, even though there's not really a reference or a mention to him. It's God. He's always working, right? Even if the people who are going about making decisions or doing things, guess what? They might not even have a recognition or understanding of him or what he's doing. He still is using all of those things in the benefit for his people, right? So that's all I wanted to say on fasting.
Well, fasting is in so many other religions, though. I mean, I think of Buddhas or whatever. They go and fast and pray and sit, and fast and pray and sit. I mean, just about every religion has that.
Yeah, Islam has a whole month of it called Ramadan. Yeah.
And like even the Native American and the Indian religion. I mean, yeah, they go
If
on
I
the hill and
fasted
fast.
for 3 days, I probably could go in, because I get hangry. So I would think I could probably just go in and go right up to him.
All right,
Yeah,
all right, King Xerxes, you listen to me.
Yeah.
I want a sandwich, and you're going to do
Sure,
what I have to say, because I am so hungry right now. Fasting is often at times associated with sackcloth. And what's interesting, I read one commentary that said, you know, like, we don't have a picture of fasting that lasts really more, like, not like don't eat for 3 days straight. Fasting is normally like fast during the day, eat at night type of thing. Like that's what fasting normally is. Here, it's a little different, which is why some people are like, this isn't the same type of fasting. Prayer's not mentioned here because prayer wasn't a part of that. I don't know if you could say that either. But this is a little bit different structure for fasting than you can see in the Bible. Oftentimes when you think about fasting, it's I'm not going to eat until the evening. When the sun goes down, then I'll eat. So it is kind of an interesting thing. Really interesting as you walk through this book. Just kind of fascinating. It really is fascinating. Please.
So with, like at the beginning when you talked about Xerxes' empire and everything, and when I think about Jews thinking about Purim and Esther, it's like it's wiping out the whole, is it really wiping out all the Jews? Is that, I mean, that would be a part of why you would think that would be included in the Bible, because you want that line to continue
Absolutely.
for the Savior.
Right.
But like even where it gets to that part about Susa, why does it say that they're all
Gather all the
those
Jews who are at
people,
Susa?
those people are bewildered. Why just that city? And then, but they were all over that country because they said that they were dispersed and scattered among all the peoples in his kingdom. That's the part I guess I was wondering about.
So the edict is for the whole kingdom, right? And I think what Esther is asking is, we don't have time to get word out to everybody. So you gather as big a group of people that you can and have them fast.
So, but with this extermination, I mean, would it really be wiping out the Jews, the whole?
That's the way it's
Seems
billed.
like it,
Yep,
right?
that's the way it's billed. And I think then there's the argument. Well, of course this has to be here. Of course this has to be in here because the Jews are under attack,
Right.
right? Absolutely, they have
And
to.
this was before Jesus was born, so I mean,
Right.
Jesus had to come from
Which
Jews.
is where you have the strange question of Mordecai is so confident when he says that. Like, and relief for the Jews will spring up from somewhere else. Like, in order for the Messiah to come, there has to be a Jewish people, there has to be a remnant. And so guess what? This will not be the end. Right? You can take it that way. And then you can say, wow, Mordecai, that is a great deal of faith that you have. That even in the face of this edict from a king who says, I'm going to kill all the Jews, he says, no, the Lord will bring, well, he doesn't say the Lord. He says, somewhere else, it will spring up relief for the Jews. Somewhere else, the relief will come. But doesn't say the Lord, which would make a whole lot of sense right there to have someone say, guess what? Relief will come from the Lord, whose name means, deliverer. No, not there. That's just kind of an amazing thing, right? Relief and deliverance for the Jews will spring up from somewhere. But there's so many places where it just would be so easy to say, the Lord. The Lord, and it's not there. This section more than I think most of the book just kind of hits you real hard, where it's like, this doesn't have the name of the Lord in it.
So what language was this written, or who do they think wrote this book?
We don't know who wrote it. We don't know.
And the
Some
language-
suggest Mordecai, but I don't really know. We don't really know. We just have the book, which, like as Corrine said, I think for good reason, right? This is from history. This is a historical event that took place, right? Jews still celebrate Purim to this day, right? And it was an attempt to get rid of them, which is essentially an attempt to stop God from doing what He had promised to do, right? And I mean, I think when you look at it from up high, it makes way more sense that it's in the Bible when you start to read through it and you're like, there's so many little things that could easily just be like, hey, the Lord, or this or that. But when you look at it from up high and you say, well, some guy tried to exterminate God's people, the Jewish people, before the Messiah came into the world, then this kind of has to be in there, right? This kind of has to be in there.
I think the story of Hanukkah, now I'm going down a rabbit hole. the whole story of Hanukkah, why that wasn't included in the.
Yeah, you get the intertestamental period, right, with the Maccabees. I don't know. That was also a very good question too. I think to myself, why not Hanukkah? Why not include that? I can't answer that. Can't answer that because that comes from the Maccabees, the Maccabean revolt, and that's all intertestamental period, right? We don't. Obviously, I'm not saying don't read it because I think it's valuable. The Maccabees are a very good read through in the aspect of understanding intertestamental time period and the things that went on with the Jewish people during that time. But they're not included in the Bible. They're
But
just
you
not.
can just see all throughout all of history where the Jews have been picked on. And they're still picked on.
Yeah.
You know, it's just yeah, persecuted all the way through.
And I think in this sense too, maybe to answer your question, Julie, are there like valuable things, like valuable resources that we read that help us understand who God is and what He's done? Like things that reference the Bible and talk about the Bible and explain it to us in a way that we're like, oh yeah, this is very good. But guess what? They're not in. They're not in the Bible. You look for that dogmatic book that we just read. God So Loved the World. That's a great book. It's fantastic. We're not going to say it's inspired. It's not a part of the Bible. But boy, it's a valuable book to read through and to grow and to say, like, I think this has a really good explanation of some of the things that maybe are a little difficult to read and get through. I think in the time period, what do you have Paul's letters doing?
Explaining the Bible.
That exact same thing,
Yeah.
right? Paul is essentially saying, guys, here's a practice that you're doing, doesn't make sense. Here's something that you should do, right? We just have the benefit of knowing that those are inspired by God, right? Because that's what it actually says. And I wouldn't put that book anywhere near, the same level as the Bible, because it's not the same thing. You know what I mean? And I think what you have is, you have books that are valuable and they explain certain things and they're helpful, but they're just not the Word of God, right? It's not something that we're going to say is inspired, is inerrant. And I would say the Maccabees, the Apocrypha, which is what you're making reference to, it's not in the same category. And I think part of that is the way in which they got those books, like how those books were written and when they were written. I think that's why they're not necessarily in there. Although I will say this, like the Septuagint, Septuagint, a Greek translation of that. So the Septuagint included that, in it, right? And so I think in a sense you get this notion of there are certain things in the New Testament where, which is written in Greek, you have Greek quotes of the Hebrew Old Testament that match up with the Septuagint. That seem to kind of like actually, not necessarily part ways, but you're like, this. If I were translating this Hebrew phrase, I wouldn't translate it this way, but it's in the Greek like it was written in the Septuagint. So it's just kind of, there's just very interesting, it's fascinating stuff, but not stuff we have time to talk about right now.
Do you study Maccabees or in SEM or?
Yeah, we went through the apocryphal books.
Okay.
We did. Remember that summer when Pastor Shrimpton, we had Bible study. It was you and Bob and Tom and I and Ron and Mary Lou. We went through some of the Maccabees.
Yeah.
And he explained a little bit more about the history of.
If you don't, so the I'm gonna stop the stream, but the